Synopsis. In a glittering Karachi restaurant, where knives flash like moonlight and reputation is currency, Lila, a humble dishwasher with hands shaped by generations of home cooking, is dared by the head chef, Asad, to make a dish, for laughs, in the middle of service. What follows is a night of heat and smoke, quiet courage, and small rebellions. Lila turns a simple, memory-laced pot of lentils into a revelation that slices through the kitchen's arrogance. Through rising tension, sabotage, and a hungry, whispering dining room, the story explores class, authenticity, ambition, and the redemptive power of being seen. The narrative is cinematic and intimate, tracking the sensory life of food, its smells, textures, and the memories it wakes, as Layla's quiet artistry reconfigures the restaurant's hierarchy and forces everyone to question what true excellence tastes like. The night the joke was meant to land, the kitchen burned like a small, controlled sun. Saffron and steel was a beast of glass and brushed metal on the fourth floor of a converted colonial building, a place where oysters were shucked to a metronome, where waiters wore linen blazers with a particular kind of unbothered pride, and where the reviews were less food criticism than a ledger of social currency. The dining room was all low light and polished wood. Its patrons dined under boff-sized chandeliers and elevated ideas about food until they tasted them and called them truthful. The kitchen, behind the swinging doors, was where truth proved itself or folded under the pressure of an expensive bill. Lila watched that pressure every evening for 3 years from the greasy comfort of the scullery sink. She had learned the restaurant's rhythms the way one learns tides. By watching the line take its water and retreat, she scrubbed pans until they shone like coins and stacked plates in towers. Her hands were small and quick. Her knuckles bore permanent stains of turmeric and years of hard water. When people in the front of house needed extra cutlery, or the pastry chef needed a hand with a glaze, she moved like a shadow that knew its edges. No one called her an artist. They called her useful. At 30, Layla carried a lifetime tucked into a single, soft atlas of memory, a grandmother's kitchen that smelled of smoked ginger and mustard oil, a village river where mango stones split like secrets, a mother's laugh muffled behind a hand when spice did its work. She had learned to cook before she learned to read a ledger, with patience, with the soft violence of crushing spices in a stone mortar, with the way salt could fix a mood. She kept those recipes in the pocket of her ribs, where no one could reach them without being shown. Chef Asad Rahman moved through the kitchen with a different kind of gravity. He was 40, neat as a hand, like crease in a shirt, trained in Paris and Manila, policed by a Michelin guide that didn't exist in Karachi but might as well have. His hands were long and efficient, his voice a clipped instrument. He loved technique the way a composer loves dissonance, for its capacity to astonish the audience into acknowledging how much they did not know. He liked food to be clever. He liked his chefs to be quick. He had no time for sentiment. That night, service was a river of orders. The burners had a blue hunger. Pans hissed like gossip. A line of waiters ghosted in and out with plates that smelled of char and citrus. Asad walked the line with a plate on his palm like a king inspecting his soldiers. When he stopped at pass, his eyes skimmed over the garnishes, the balanced sauces, the foam that simulated cloud and failed to hold rain. He did not see Lila at first. He rarely looked at those who worked with water and refuse. "Those scallops," he said, and Bilal, his sus, shifted. "Too soft. Crisp should be crisp." He flicked a finger as if flaking the shell of something. Remind everyone technique beats memory. Memory is nostalgia with bad lighting. In the scullery, Lila held a saucepan that smelled like cumin and lemon. She was finishing a little pot of dal she'd started before dinner, a handful of red lentils, water, a pinch of salt. It was redundant. The restaurant's menu had no dal. Everything here had been remodeled into small, metaphorical floors of flavor and priced accordingly. Layla didn't cook for menace. She cooked for mornings. She'd taken to cooking small pots before the shift, folding her day into a private ritual. It kept some part of her sane. Tonight's pot had been a deliberate practice: lentils left to dissolve into themselves, a tarka of mustard seeds, a soft crush of roasted cumin, a charred lemon split by her grandmother's thumb. She had trapped the citrus's smoke under a lid and watched it steam until it bloomed like a bruise. It smelled like home. It felt like something she could carry. The warning bell for order came as a shout. Assad barked, a sound like a metronome gone angry. "Taste," he ordered, and Bilo presented the night's amuse a spoon of something that had been deconstructed into air. Assad tasted, and his face was the weather cloudy, then storming. He turned, and for the first time, his eyes cut through the room to the scullery where Lila bent over the sink, her fingers smooth around a wooden spoon. He watched her like a man spotting a stray dog in a park. Curious, slightly condescending, amused by the idea of taming it. "You," Assad said. His voice reached not with the weight of command, but like the light flick of a mercy. "You can cook, can't you? I see you make the staff meals keep disappearing." Lila's face stayed calm. She had been invisible enough that any glance was a small, dangerous gift. "I can," she said, because the truth tasted better than silence. He smiled, the kind of smile that shaped itself into a trap. "Then cook something for us. Make a dish tonight. I'll put it on the small plates. See how the guests react." It was not a command, it was a dare dressed as a favor, and the kitchen caught the joke like a hot coal. Laughter bubbled in the stainless steel seams. Bilo, a man with a jaw that had not yet learned to be tender, snorted. "A dish for the dining room." There was amusement in his voice and a thinly veiled certainty that a night of embarrassment would follow. An easy story to tell at after shift beers. Lila felt the air change. Jokes in kitchens were tools. To humiliate, to release pressure, to remind. She could refuse. She could smile and shrink. She had done both 1,000 times. But something in Assad's look was not just challenge, there was a public ledger being opened. He wanted to own the evening's story. She set down the wooden spoon and lifted her chin. "All right," she said. Her voice surprised her. It was small but unflinching, like a match lit in a wet room. The joke took root and grew teeth. "Make it interesting," Assad said, as if adding sugar. "But keep it honest to where it belongs." He had no idea what he'd ask. That phrase picked at something inside Lila. That stubborn relic of memory where recipes kept their own time. She had until the second seating ended to produce something that could be sent to tables. Something that would not only survive, but be noticed. She went to the walk-in and gathered lentils, a small can of tamarind paste, a lemon gone black on one side, mustard oil, green chilies. She took from the pantry a clay pot the pastry chef swore was, for show, a little earthen thing that retained heat like a small cosmos. She had known, in the tower of plates and saucers, a place existed for her pot. Bilo watched with narrowed eyes. "You'll burn the house down," he said. "Or you'll feed it," Layla answered. She felt then an absurd kinship with the stove. Assad had meant to humiliate her by placing her dish before a table of regulars known to be finicky. A lawyer, a television producer, a blogger with an accent for cruelty. He called for something authentic, but upgraded. Use her dish as a palate cleanser. Then laugh in the back. Lila listened to the plan with a tennis ball heartbeat. She could have walked away, kept her hands in the ware. Oaths of safety were comfortable. But she did something else. She called up the memory like a ghost and let it fill the pan. When she cooked, she thought in measures her grandmother had taught her without a ruler. A pinch, a breath, a handful. She cooked by listening. She rinsed the red lentils until the water ran faint as morning, Then let them simmer with onions, cut to translucent, a sliver of bay leaf, and the ghost of a dried chili for fragrance. She did not use stock. She had learned that water and lentils could talk to each other if you left them enough room. She tempered mustard seeds in mustard oil until the kitchen smelled like a train station. Hot metal and possibility. And poured that oil into the pot with the soft hiss that meant things were connecting. The secret was a charred lemon. Her grandmother had taught her to hold citrus over an open flame until its skin wrinkled and blackened. Then squeeze that smoke into the pot with a wise sigh. The lemon lived between tartness and the smell of something that had been at the center of many kitchens. Lila seared a half lemon on the plancha until its surface was a map of burned constellations. She rubbed crushed cumin into butter and stirred in a hand of chopped coriander at the end, soft and green as a child's promise. Bilal hovered like a hawk. He tasted the dal. His face went rigid, like someone reading a sentence for the first time and finding it exactly what they'd been avoiding. "It's warm," he said, and his tone betrayed the accident of admiration. "You make a good staff meal. Don't mess it up." Assad called from the pass. He meant it half as reassurance and half as threat. Lila plated the dal in the clay pot, a modest bowl set on a low saucer, and capped it with a roti scraped over flame to a bruise. The roti puffed a little as it met the heat, a small ceremony. She sent it to the pass with hands that did not tremble. The dining room, as if in a theater for the absurd, responded to the dish the way audiences sometimes respond to a forgotten lyric, with curiosity, some polite skepticism, then with an easing, a surprised pleasure. The lawyer who leaned on his napkin was the first to notice. He inhaled and blinked. The blogger, Ali, the woman with a camera forever at the ready, photographed the clay pot as if it were an artifact. The producer, whose palate had been trained on trends, chewed slowly and said nothing, which in culinary criticism is very close to worship. The wave returned to the kitchen as a sound. "Table 7 says it's like their grandmother's kitchen," a waiter reported, like someone delivering a small miracle. Assad watched the dining room like a man watching a stage he'd believed to be his. He waited for the laugh, the tilt of a head, the hidden smirk. He found, instead, quiet people turning the small spoon, feeling the lentils hold, tasting the char that did not shout but suggested geography, the mustard oil, the memory of a flame. For an hour, the kitchen held its breath. Then something unanticipated happened. A critic, a local whose words had the power to tilt bookings, requested to speak with the chef. His name was Imran Bukhari, a man with a pen that had already settled 2 hearts in the city. He had tasted the dal and asked, "Who made this?" Assad stepped forward with half a smile, ready to collect the praise like a coin. "My team," he said. "But—" Imran's eyes found Lila. She had retreated to the scullery, hands on a damp rag, pretending to be invisible. He pointed with that pen like a compass. "Her. The girl in the sink. Bring her to me." It was a small request. It was a loud one. They cleared a space at a corner table. Noor, the owner, a woman in her 50s who had built saffron and steel with a stubbornness that made investors both admire and fear her, watched with a smile that could be a plagiarism of caution. She had the sort of face that believed success was something to be negotiated. When Lila arrived, the lights in her head were simple and bright. She smelled of lemon and steam. Her hair was collected behind her ears in a way that made her look like a person capable of miracles. Imran leaned forward, his face a theater of interest. "This dal," he said. "It tastes like 3 different memories at once. It tastes like a bus stop at dawn, an old sari that has lived 100 summers, and a child's first promise of a market mango. Who taught you to make it?" Lila folded her hands. Her voice was small and particular, like a bell newly struck. "My grandmother," she said. We used to cook with a little oil and less pride. Imran laughed softly, the kind of sound that was not cruel. Less pride sometimes feeds the most prideful palates. At Assad, who had come to take the credit, felt the room tilt. He had expected to be asked, "Whose dish is this?" He had not expected to be an audience member for the narrative of another's hands. But the narrative had momentum. Imran wrote that night, and his column ran the next morning in a city that ate critics' words like brunch. He called the dish a small, furious epiphany, and wrote that Saffron and Steele had, for one shining moment, remembered how to eat. He quoted patrons who wept into spoons. He named Lila, and the name in a column had a way of becoming a small flame. The reaction was immediate and ambiguous. Bookings spiked. People wanted to taste the dal that had made the critic cry. Food influencers queued with the fervor of papal pilgrims. Noor, trying to manage the attention, insisted on repeating the dish as a nightly special. Assad, whose career had been a tower of carefully arranged plateaus, felt something shift that he could not calibrate. The shift tore at the kitchen like a new wind. "We cannot make a restaurant out of nostalgia," Assad said one night, the words peeling off his tongue with the bitterness of a man who had spent his life inventing appetite. "We have to sell an idea." He paced like a ruler at school, and yet when he tasted Layla's dal again, his face betrayed him with softening. Inside the staff locker, the world divided into factions. Some saw Layla's popularity as an opportunity. Bilal, for all his bluster, had been quietly learning from Layla's measures. He now suggested they adapt the dish to a tasting menu, refine it with sus, vide lentils and citrus espuma. Others feared the loss of control. The pastry chef feared the dilution of art. The captain feared the unpredictability of people who wanted to feel remembered. Lila had thought that recognition would be an answering bell, a simple arc. Instead, it became a crossroad. Noor offered her a position-making, homage nights. Once a month the restaurant would close and reopen, with Layla's recipes presented as theater. It was generous and condescending in the same breath. Lila thought of her grandmother's tiny hands and of the small house on the river where every guest was family. She could accept and trade a small part of her privacy for stability. She could stay behind the scenes like the stir that happens in a pot, or step into the light and risk the flame of it all. There were other offers. A television show wanted to film Street to Plate, a phrase that made Layla feel like a commodity. A publisher wanted to include her story in a cookbook titled Unsung Kitchens. Each offer wrapped the same principle in different paper: translate authenticity into product. Assad watched. He had made a decision somewhere between his curiosity and his ego. He began to study Layla's hands with the same intensity he had once reserved for Michelin inspectors. He watched the way she tore coriander, the angle of her blade when she cut a green chili, the care with which she tasted and added salt. He began to attend to what he'd once dismissed as mere affection for flavor. He began, inelegantly at first, to learn. In the days that followed, he did something no one had expected. He apologized. It was not a grand apology, no press release or staged handshake, but a small, honest confession in the heat of prep. "I was wrong," he said, standing by a sink where cilantro waiting to be chopped had haloed his shoes. Lila scrubbed a pan and the words hung like steam. She looked up from the kettle. She had expected arrogance, maybe an offer of mentorship hidden in condescension. Instead, Assad moved like a man deflating, like a hat that had spent too much time on one head. "You have a way of making nothing taste like everything," he said. It was clumsy, and it was the nearest thing he had to praise. She considered it. She had no illusions about reordering the world, no illusions about the scale of this city or the smallness of a clay pot. "You can take the idea," she said finally, "but do not turn it into something it is not." He nodded, which was the first real agreement. she had extracted from him. We'll keep it honest. Keeping it honest was a clause that meant different things to different people. To Assad, it meant scaling without losing the architecture. To Noor, it meant capitalizing on the moment while ensuring investors smiled. To the staff, it meant that the rhythm of their nights did not warp into an endless marketing event. For Lila, honesty meant keeping the kitchen's rituals intact, the specific burn on a lemon, the exact amount of tang in the tamarind paste, the patience to let lentils fall apart on their own terms. The first of Layla's homage nights was a test of how much a restaurant could hold before it broke. They put up a sign that read, "Tonight food like you remember." The restaurant filled with people who wanted to be moved. Imran booked a front table. Bilal requested extra shifts. Investors sat in the dim with folding manners and measuring spoons. The pass was a map of controlled chaos. Lila worked in the center like a woman threading a needle while a parade marched by. She cooked the dal again and an assortment of other things she had in her head, a fritter made of bitter greens, folded into chickpea batter, a mango chutney that tasted of noon, and sticky fingers, a little curried lamb heel that fell away from the bone. She made one dish at a time and sent it out not as evidence of novelty, but as a story told in small bites. The kitchen sang. Assad, surprisingly, embraced the role of student. He taught Lila how to pair a carrot with a swivel that made the shavings look like confetti. She taught him how to listen to the sound of lentils as they came to tenderness. They argued over salt like two people bartering for a shared belief. The staff watched these exchanges with the wary elation of people who have seen a slow motion collision turn into a new road. The climax of that night arrived like a slow drum. Midway through service, a small crisis, as kitchens love to manufacture, blew across the pass. A gas line hiccuped, a burner refused to catch. The line stalled. Plates lurched in the hands of waiters, and customers glanced at their watches. In the middle of it, a regular stood up suddenly, a blunt, cruel man who had always thought of Layla's world as a prop. He stood and made a speech about authenticity being a performance. Boutique nostalgia. His voice spread, a ripple of arrogant certainty. He called Layla's food a decoration for sentiment. The dining room's attention snapped like a string. Silence fell. Layla felt the heat of it like sun on skin. She could have kept her head down and let the scald of it burn. The old Layla, who had learned to be unseen, would have retreated. Instead, she did what she had always done in the kitchen. She fed. She asked for one table's transient silence and returned with a small, steaming bowl of dal. The man who had spoken to the room took a bite. The sound he made, a thin, involuntary vowel, was not the sound of delight or disgust, but of being stopped by something inconveniently true. He sat, his arrogance folded like a napkin. Imran, who had watched her since that first night, stood and placed his notebook flat on the table. He tapped the page and said, "This city can buy its way into cuisine, but you can't buy the memory of a hand that has fed you in winter. Lila knows it." The critic's voice was a chord of authority the rumor-loving city could not ignore. The room revived as if from prayer. Conversations restarted with a new timbre, a mixture of humility and hunger. Layla's pot, small and unadorned, had rebalanced a ledger no one had known they were keeping. After service, the kitchen was a field of sweat. People drank water and murmured like an orchard. Assad found Lila at the sink, the clay pot set gently on the counter, the last of the dal steaming like a small cloud. He gave her no more jokes that night. Outside, the city wore its evening like a shawl. Noor came out to the kitchen and took both their hands with a sudden, grandmotherly clench. "You brought something home," she said to Lila, and in those two words was a permission and a knuckled blessing. Offers kept arriving. Features, even a small column in a foreign magazine. The bakery across the street wanted to sell a sandwich inspired by Layla's chutney. A philanthropic group wanted to fund a culinary school with a curriculum at the intersection of technique and tradition. There were decisions to make, and decisions have the exact gravity of a coin. Lila chose in small increments. She refused the television show that wanted to package her into a transformation arc. She accepted Noel's suggestion of a 3-month residency with conditions she helped write. No more than 2 homage nights a week, a list of signature dishes she would not have changed into experiments, and a promise that whoever took her recipes into other hands would do so with her watching. She insisted that the staff be paid for overtime and that the clay pot remain on the menu. She negotiated respect in a language she had learned without a teacher, the steady articulation of self. Assad grew into a strange kind of ally. He began to build menu items that honored simple techniques he had scoffed at. He left behind a dish that sat like a question on menus. People asked for Assad's interpretation, and he would point discreetly to a corner of the pass where Layla's clay pot steamed in its small, stubborn way. Not everyone was satisfied. Some senior critics considered it a fad. Some younger chefs latched onto the trend and wore it like a badge without the work. But in the wake of the evening's events, a line of other kitchens in the city began to put older, less fashionable ingredients into the light. A tea stall in a lane offered its own version of charred lemon with dal. A bakery began to fold spices into morning breads. It was, in its small way, a shift. Months later, Lila stood on the roof above the restaurant. The city spread like a map of small hearths. Her brother called from overseas with news that made her hands shake with joy. She fed him recipes over the line of a phone, measures as stories, instructions as tenderness. She had a residency contract folded in a drawer, but had not yet written a book. The clay pot still lived in the kitchen's heart. Sometimes she would find a note tucked beneath its lid, a leftover compliment, or a thank you folded like a secret. Assad found her on that roof. He had changed in ways he did not announce. He had stopped telling the staff that memory was bad lighting and had begun, rather pathetically, to ask for simple things the way to char a lemon, the exact noise a doll makes when it is ready to be loved. "You did not break us," he said, and there was a small apology contained in the sentence like a seed. "You didn't either," she replied. "We're different now." He looked out at the city with less posturing, like a man who had learned one more room in his house. "You gave the patrons what they didn't know they wanted," he admitted. "You gave them humility." He lapsed into something like a smile. "And you gave me a new thing to measure my food by." Lila watched the lights blink on windows like small domestics, satellite dishes like tin flowers. She felt the memory of her grandmother's hands, the way they had taught her to press lemon into lentils until steam wrote itself across the air. She had brought that home. Yes, not as a trophy but as a conversation. She realized the power of being seen was not only in the applause, but in the chance to refuse being commodified. In the months that followed, Saffron and Steel kept its lights and its way of balancing art and commerce. Layla's name became a soft legend in the city, a woman who taught a kitchen how to remember. She did not vanish into the glare of fame. She remained, in much of the kitchen's hours, a person who could be found at the sink, learning to fold in a new chill into the bread dough, arguing with Assad about the right time to stop cooking something. The clay pot was often empty, but sometimes, in quiet service, when the wind blew through the open window and the pass hummed like a hive, it would be returned with a little dowel inside, and people would taste, and they would remember. The last image of that arc pulled tight as a winch was small and domestic Layla, hands dusted with flour, leaning over the clay pot and pressing a charred lemon into it, her mouth shaping the recipe the way a child shapes a secret. A server leaned in and said in a soft voice. Table 11 said it reminded them of their mother's hands. Layla simply nodded and smiled, and outside, the city kept being a city, but a little kinder that night to small things.